Aging gracefully and strong, bringing you cutting edge trends in holistic and integrative medicine on IQ Podcasts and Attorney King Studios. Today, I have a very special guest. We're going to have a conversation about what is the difference between bias and racism. And can you really tell when somebody is racist or not? I know it's a huge topic right now. And I don't think we're going to be able to get a clear cut answer in our little time that we speak, but we're going to open up the conversation and we're going to talk about it today. My guest today is my husband of 27 years. His name is Dr. Rafael Silva. He is the Equity, Inclusion, Diversity Council Leader for Kaiser Permanente. And their mission is to promote inclusion and health equity in their med center. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
I want to talk to you because I know you have a lot of experience in this, in the work that you do for Kaiser. Can you tell me what is the difference between bias, or what is implicit bias versus racism?
Yeah, sure. I'll be happy to talk about it. I want to extend a lot of love to anybody in your audience who's African American or whose, loved ones are African American because of recent losses. The loss of life, and we all know the story with Mr. Floyd, George Floyd. I think we all felt that. A lot of us did, but I think if you're African American, you felt it way more. And I think it's important to extend our love and support and let people know that there's a lot of allies out there. So much love to people. Stay strong, and there's a lot of allies out there. So in my work, I do go around our medical center, different places, talking about those topics, social justice, and including bias and racism. So bias is preconceived notions that anybody has, any of us. We all have bias, by the way. So bias is basically quick judgment, and some examples of that would be, it's in our language. If you've ever said we're looking for the best man for the job, when really we're looking for the best person for the job, that's a bias, right? It's related to gender. That's a gender bias. If you've ever seen a driver who's very slow in front of you and you're just, oh my God, they're weaving a little bit in the middle of the day, you're thinking, well, that's probably an old person driving. And you pass them up, you got to try to get in a look and see what they look like. Oftentimes, they're not an older person. It's somebody texting, who knows, different things going on. So those are biases that our brain makes. We make this quick judgment with no data.
And that's the implicit bias, right? That's where you don't have any implicit conscious awareness, and people make those quick judgments, and that's what they call implicit bias versus something that's another word, explicit bias, right?
Another word for implicit bias is subconscious bias. Some people say that's a blind spot. That's a blind spot for them. Subconscious bias, implicit bias, all of that is the same thing. Yes, versus explicit, where you know you're biased and you just don't care and you don't try to fight that bias or work on it and make it better or be aware of it. Exactly. Implicit or subconscious is the same thing. And anybody can have a subconscious bias. So why it happens is really interesting. I was in a room with a scientist, a PhD doctor who's a PhD who does a lot of research with behavior and neuroscience. And he spent about half a day with us teaching us why is it that this occurs. And it's very interesting because our brain uses a lot of ATP, a lot of energy molecules. If you've ever been busy at work just solving problems, you're not lifting anything, you're not walking, you're just busy with your brain, and you get home, you're so tired. Your brain was burning a lot of ATP. So our brain is so busy all the time, we're problem solving all the time, that we basically take a shortcut. We look at someone or something and we make a quick judgment with no data. And that's where biases come from. So why we do it is, oftentimes not to be mean or not to be racist, because that's another story. We'll talk about that in a minute. It's just, we just do it automatically. We don't think about it. And I think there's a famous example of bias. I don't know if you guys heard about the case of the gentleman that was walking Central Park. He was bird watching in Central Park. Did you hear about that?
Yes, it was all over the media, where he asked a woman to please leash her dog because it was an ordinance in Central Park to have dogs leashed. And she was really, for some reason, she felt threatened. And he happened to be an African American male, and she felt threatened by his presence and called 911 and said, if you know, don't, she just, it was just very interesting. You could tell that she was scared, even though there wasn't an apparent danger or threat to her. She felt threatened. And so I think that's what you were talking about earlier, about the biases that come in, because she had a quick judgment that he was going to be a threat to her.
That's right. And that's why I go around our medical center talking about bias, because I think if that lady had been aware that she had this bias, because the way I see it, I don't know for sure, but the way my read on this is that she did have a bias. Subconscious or not, we don't know. She was either aware of her bias or not, but her read that gentleman was a threat, and there's nothing in his behavior to demonstrate that he was a threat. He was bird watching, the most peaceful thing anybody could do, right? So,
but it was interesting. It was interesting because he also said, I don't know if she's racist because I can't make that judgment having a 1 minute interaction with her. But what she did was a racist act. So, but he wasn't quick to judge and say that she was racist. So
I totally agree with him. Yes, I agree with him. I think if she was aware of her bias, that she had this and had somehow been confronted, she wouldn't have reacted that way, because she would just be more aware of it and say, there's really nothing really here. It's your brain trying to take a shortcut and you're reacting, and slow down. And she would have saved herself a lot of pain, because what she did is she put him at risk. Didn't really consider what that meant to him to call the police on this man, and she didn't care enough, and that's so her bias led to a racist act.
Right.
And that's what he said. He says, I don't know if she's racist, but that was a racist act.
And a lot of people would be quick to judge and call her racist for that act, because it's a very trying time right now. I think people are less patient because of everything that's going on with the quarantine and COVID, that they're more anxious already to begin with. And I think that makes people less apt to be patient and to take a step back and say, okay, what's going on in this situation? And as you said, biases can be subconscious, right? If it's an implicit bias, and that bias could be positive or negative. I mean, you always tease me that I have a positive bias towards Canadians, because I love Canadians, and I just happen to think they're the nicest people in the world. So when I meet a Canadian and I see a Canadian, I have a positive bias towards Canadians. And I think it's because when I went to British Columbia, I just thought they were the nicest people in the world. But yes, we all have biases that we have to be aware of. But those biases are shaped by our life experiences, by what we're taught, at a very young age. we have dinner conversations with our children about this because we want them to be aware of what's going on in their surroundings. And I was really proud of their awareness of, the difference between bias and racism. And they shared with me the kindergarten study. I don't know if you know about this kindergarten study where they showed kids that were black and white, and they showed them dolls that were also of different skin types, light and medium and dark dolls. And they asked each child which doll they preferred, or which one was the nicest, or which one they had a more positive attitude towards. And both the young white child and the black child both pick white as being the white doll as being more positive,
Hmm.
or
Yeah.
having, so it's ingrained really early,
Young.
those images and those biases of what's good or what's not good. And I know we really have to fight that to and not be quick to judgment. And I know that
So very true.
those biases have also affected healthcare disparities. Being doctors, all too well how those biases can affect quality healthcare for people who are going to be not have the best resources. Can you talk about that a little bit? The healthcare.
Absolutely. I wanted to make a quick note on positive
Mhm.
bias because we always talk about negative bias and
Mhm.
you think that's harmful. So we need to be aware of our negative biases because I think when you talk about it and you tell people everybody has biases, for many it's an aha moment. Everybody has biases. And so
Mhm.
when you're confronting yours, I think you can decide if it's a negative bias towards someone else or another
Mhm.
group. I think that's where you have to have a conversation with yourself about that negative bias because I think that's where the harm can occur, like the case we talked about. Now, with positive bias, I often think, well, is there any harm when you have a positive bias? And I think of a couple of cases where it would be harmful. For example, everybody knows Bernie Madoff, the guy who walked away with billions of dollars of very intelligent people. He basically swindled them.
Mhm.
But if you read about this guy, he always showed up with his best, suit on and the most expensive watch and the most expensive car. He looked like money. So he used the positive bias of those things, those symbols,
Mhm.
so that people just gave him their money without checking in on him. So we do have to be careful with positive bias. And another example I think about is, a lot of people will say African American, male and female are athletic, but if you just go, that's, what's the problem there? But if you just think of people that way, you forget that they're much, much more. And if you're a teacher and you're just thinking that way, then maybe you're not, as let's say, tough on the learning part. You're only focusing on one physical aspect. So anyway, I think positive bias, we have to use data. We have to say, let me meet this person, let me slow down, let me see what they're about. And that way you're not working with the bias, you're working with information. But we'll jump over to healthcare disparities that have been around for a very long time. I mean, we in medicine we had data that people of color and especially African Americans, the longevity was less than whites. So there was a commission. It was commissioned by Congress in 2012 around that time to measure healthcare outcomes. So we found out that if you're African American, you have high blood pressure, the probability that your blood pressure is controlled was much, much less than if you're white. If you're a African American diabetic, the probability that you are under control was much, much less than if you were white. And so that led to more strokes and more heart attacks and early death. And so that's the healthcare disparity. Why this happens is multifactorial. There's, individual reasons, systemic reasons, access, um, all kinds of belief systems. So it's multifactorial. and it's something that we have to really, as a society, address because it starts very young. Your living environment plays a role. If you're living around, less access to healthy food, you're going to be obese sooner. So you're going to be diabetic sooner, hypertension sooner. So all of that plays a role in health disparities. And we, society and medical systems, we all have to play a role in making that better.
And I think the pandemic has magnified some of those inequities in our diverse community because we've seen that even though the African American population or people of color have been infected less as a whole, they get sicker more. And probably one of the reasons is because of access to healthcare. And I think that it's just actually put a magnifying glass to that to kind of reassess what kind of resources are available to people that need it. So I think it's important to not forget about that, especially in the in what's going on just economically in our country, because now a lot of more people are going to be out of work with the closure again. California closed down again, and that economic um, challenge that people are going to be facing is even going to cause more healthcare disparities. And I am concerned about that because I know that it's just a challenging time with people feeling strapped already financially, and the coronavirus is not going to go away anytime soon. So I know that people are worried about that because we closed down again in California, and it's not. We need to think about that when we think about who's going to get sick during this second wave, or we're still supposedly in the middle of the first wave right now. The one thing else I wanted to bring up is that yes, we have these kind of biases, but what can we do? What can we do as individuals about it?
For me, just realizing where bias comes from, and first of all, realize that most of us have our biases, and there are some that are harmful, of
Mhm.
course. Like this idea that African American males, in particular, and females too, but the police, for example, will think in their bias, many police, not all. There we have great police in San Diego, but as you have seen and we all have seen, they think seem to think that they are higher threat, and so that bias is something that if it's existing in someone who is in that position of power, they need to be very self-aware, and they need obviously systemic help to deal with that because that bias is very, very harmful. So, but I think slowing down
Mhm.
is my take home when you see someone, you don't know them, you just you know seeing what physically what they look like, you don't know them, and so you don't have any data to say this is good person or not, or etc. You need to know them. So I think slowing down. I think if you grow your circle of friends to include people that are not like you, because the best sort of not cure, but the best improvement for people that have biases is to be exposed to different people, right? Have a diverse group of people at work and friends, and you're gonna see that they're just like you. We are more alike than we are different. We just need to know each other and lose the fear to go out of your comfort zone and extend a hand out to people that are not in your regular circle, that are different than
Mhm.
you. I think that's probably, and I think that even at work sites, we want to hire for diversity wherever we are, because that's the best thing you could do to have a inclusive work environment and inclusive environment in society. So I think that's one of my take home messages.
Well, I think that inclusion begins from within. So I think for us to be better as a community, I think we have to be better individually. and really do a lot of self reflection because the biases are so ingrained, and it's going to be everyone's going to be different based on how they were raised and who they were who they were raised with and by and what their community looked like while they were growing up. But I do believe that we do have the power to make those changes if we start with ourselves. But it's going to be very challenging because it's such a crazy time right now when I see people just worried about food and shelter, if they're going to make rent, if they're going to be able to see the doctor. And as a wellness doctor, it's really hard for me to see all of this anxiety going around because it just makes your health outcomes worse. For me, I focus on sleep and energy. And for me, when you have a lot of stress, like what's going on right now with the coronavirus epidemic, that stress increases your cortisol and messes you up physiologically, where you might not be able to sleep and you have decreased energy during the day. And so when you're not 100%, it's hard to make sometimes those important judgment decisions. And I think that's why people are more likely to make quick decisions, right? Because I know implicit bias happens because neurologically we have to be quick in our responses to keep ourselves from danger. And when people have more cortisol around, which happens under times of stress, that fight or flight response sometimes interferes with judgment or can interfere with how they feel or act at that given situation. People always will make better judgment if they're not tired or if they're not stressed. And I think right now it's just a hard time for a lot of people, especially people who are in stressful situations at work. I mean, we've heard that domestic violence is higher now because people are cooped up. They're not able to engage with other people. And I think that is a good point that you made about one way we can really get through this is to reach out and engage with other people. But it's hard when you're doing social distancing, right? We have to be connected while we're disconnected. And I think it's just very challenging right now. I know that people are trying to get together with Zoom and talk and FaceTime, but it's not the same. I treated a couple of detention officers today. I treat a lot of police and detention officers and border patrol in my office, and they say that they have to work under these perils and these stresses, and sometimes they can't make the best decision because of all the stress that they're under. And so we really have to look at what's going on, in terms of the environment around us and how that really affects how we deal with others. And it is a truly challenging time right now. So, but I really like that you said that we have to start with ourselves because I really believe that we we are on this journey together of life. And yes, the virus has been devastating for us, um, financially and just in the whole society as a whole is changing. But I really believe we're stronger than the virus. And I believe that we can get through this. And just recognizing the things that we can do with ourselves, with self reflection, and not forgetting that we can make a difference in our own community. I think that that matters. Is there anything that you would like to say um, before we end our podcast today?
No, except that you keep hearing that we need to have a national discussion around race and bias, and I think that's true. But I think it starts with that internal conversation that we all need to have, because when we have that conversation, you're right. I think we will realize that we're in it together. We will realize that we have to show empathy. If for people that are on the receiving end of societal bias, imagine the stress that feels like. And I think when we can imagine that with that kind of empathy, I think we feel that we want to be part of the answer. So I think that's it.
And we will leave it at that, because I think that that's a great way to end the conversation. It's a very difficult, challenging conversation to have, but I really do believe that if we could look within ourselves, we can actually get through this together. But we do have to have that self reflection and realize that inclusion starts with each of us. I thank you so much for having this conversation with me, Dr. Silva.
Of
And
course,
thank you. And I will see you soon for dinner.
I'll see you
So,
for dinner.
yes. So, this is Dr. Melinda at Aging Gracefully and Strong, bringing you cutting edge trends in holistic and integrative medicine on IQ Podcast at Attorney King Studios.